This is GTV, Full Color Entertainment. In the 1990s, Sega began a series of projects that were given code names corresponding to the planets of the solar system. The very first one was called Project Mercury, which came to be known as Game Gear. Choosing Mercury as a code name was pretty clever, as there are several connections to the planet closest to the Sun. After the Mega Drive, the ambitious solar system naming scheme came into being, and Game Gear was the first of many Sega products to come down the line in the 1990s. So it seems only natural that it would be named after the first planet of the solar system. Mercury is also the messenger of the gods in ancient mythology and was always on the go. As well, Game Gear was meant to go anywhere for gaming anytime. Originally, Sega was very close to buying a machine called Handy from developer Epyx. Sega was so close to signing the deal, booth space was reserved for the machine at the 1989 Winter CES, but the deal fell through. Epyx sold the Handy to Atari, and that became the Lynx. But that's a whole nother story for a whole nother time. Sega went back to the drawing board and came back with Game Gear, essentially a portable Mark III. The heart of the machine would use a Zilog Z80 CPU, the same one from the Mark III and its predecessor, the SG-1000 as well. The full-color backlit screen was 3.2 inches in size and ran 160 by 144 pixels in size. In an age before Retina displays, it was considered pretty good. All the specs from the Mark III were carried over, but one enhancement was made, as the color palette was bumped up from 64 colors to 4,096. Still, only 32 were used on screen at any time. The FM sound chip used for some games in Japan was left out. The brilliance of turning the Mark III into Game Gear was that the converting of games was super easy. Many of the first wave Game Gear titles came from the Master System. G-Lock, Castle of Illusion, Wonder Boy, Sonic the Hedgehog, and a few others had a corresponding SMS version. In Japan, these Game Gear versions would be the only way to play, while in the US, and especially the UK, Europe, and Australia, it was kind of hard to tell if these games were for the Master System and just happened to have a Game Gear version too, or vice versa. Some of these dual version games were improved on Game Gear. For example, Psychic World is almost a completely different game, while Columns had improved backgrounds and those wonderful fruit pieces in place of jewels. While we're on the topic of Columns, that was the game Americans got for free when Game Gear came stateside in 1991. It eventually got included in other regions as well, but not long after, Sonic the Hedgehog became the free game. And if you were lucky enough to get a Game Gear at just the right time, you could have gotten both for free. Thank God for mail order. Game Gear had an amazing feature the Game Boy and Lynx did not have, a TV tuner. Yeah, we all know the Turbo Express had one too, but what are we, millionaires? With this little doodad, you could catch your favorite TV shows, if you had good enough reception. Nothing like watching Get a Life, in bed, under the covers on Sunday night, before you gotta go back to school on Monday. Am I right? Sega also released another little add-on, the Master Gear Converter, in 1992. This lets you play any Master System games you had laying around. An odd choice in the USA, as by 92, the SMS was long gone from the shelves. Probably much cooler for those places where the SMS was still active. Either way, amazing to take Phantasy Star on the road, which is certainly enough reason to buy one. Other add-ons were released over the life of Game Gear: Game Genie, Pro Action Replay, Wide Gear, and an FM radio tuner. Sadly though, Sega never made any kind of adapter to play your Game Gear games on the big screen. A missed opportunity. Game Gear took on the Game Boy in the portable gaming space head-on with a huge ad blitz, constantly hammering Nintendo and the Game Boy's lack of color. Sega also nabbed up lots of decent third-party releases, many of which were also on the Game Boy, showing the stark difference between the two machines. Mortal Kombat, Faceball, Prince of Persia, Mega Man, The Simpsons, and a few WWF games were all present on Game Gear. And yeah, maybe they were a little clunky in some cases, but were light years ahead of the Game Boy version. Then Sega brought their own heavy hitters on board. Did you know there are 6 mainline Sonic games on Game Gear? Of course you did. There are also a few side games like Sonic Spinball and Sonic Labyrinth, not to mention 8-bit versions of Gunstar Heroes and Dynamite Headdy. Then there were the RPGs. These were mostly in Japan. But hey, we got Shining Force too. With the games and marketing behind it, Sega and Game Gear kept going, all the way to 1996 when it met its discontinuation in Japan, and in the rest of the world the next year. But in that 6 or 7 year span, there were 366 official releases around the world, and a little over 10 million in sales. Not bad. And yeah, if you want to get into it, Game Gear took 6 AA batteries that lasted about 4 hours, far less than the Game Boy, don't remind me, but still on par with the battery life of the Nintendo 3DS and Switch. So what's up with that? Talk about dropping the ball, Nintendo. We all used AC adapters and rechargeable batteries in the 90s anyways, so it didn't matter. There was a short second life to Game Gear, as the machine saw re-release in the year 2000, when Majesco reissued Game Gear and a few classic games to go along with it. The Majesco Game Gear is essentially the same, but the TV tuner no longer works, and it's easy to identify as the red, green, and blue logo is now white. This Game Gear model sold for around $30 and managed one new release as well, Super Battle Tank. The Majesco release ran its course as a budget machine and didn't hang around too long, but there was a third life to the Game Gear, as select titles appeared on the 3DS Virtual Console beginning in 2011. Only 16 games, but they were the best of the best, and playing them on a little 3D floaty Game Gear background was pretty cool. And now, the good, old, trusty, and beloved Game Gear turns 30 years old. To celebrate, Sega shocked everyone with the release of the Game Gear Micro. 4 different models in 4 different colors, with 4 different games each. Released on October 6, 2020, 30 years to the day after the original. The jury's still out on how these play, but they sure look cool. Now you know all these fun and interesting tidbits, and maybe you already knew a few already. But let's end on a fun one. You know how the codename for Game Gear was Project Mercury? The codename lived on long after the name Game Gear became reality, as all Japanese Game Gear models begin with the letters HG. The letters used for Mercury on the periodic table of elements.